Welcome back, explorers, to Whoosh Tales, the home of the most extraordinary kids' adventure stories anywhere on the internet, where every single week we bring you a brand new English story for children that goes deeper than the one before it. This is episode 7, and if you have been with us since the very beginning, I need to tell you something honestly before we begin today. Some of these adventures have been about facing what is dangerous. Some of them have been about understanding what is ancient. But the adventure we are about to take with Finn Walker today is the kind that you carry with you forever, because it is not about a monster or a creature or a hidden city or a living forest. It is about meeting someone. And what happens when you finally meet a person who has been waiting their entire life for you to walk through the door? 3 days had passed since Greymoor Mountain breathed, and Finn pressed the compass into the cliff face and walked into the chamber of amber columns and learned what the mountain wanted him to know. 3 days during which the compass in his pocket pointed downward at the mountain every single moment of every single day, pointing not at the chamber he had already visited, but at something deeper, something old Thomas had told him to approach with the greatest possible care because it mattered more than anything Finn had yet faced. 3 days during which Finn did not sleep particularly well, because some part of him already understood that the person waiting in that deeper room had been waiting for a very long time. And the weight of that waiting pressed against his thoughts every time he tried to rest. On the 4th morning, he sat at the kitchen table and told Nora exactly what old Thomas had said. About the deeper room. About the boy who had been there since before Finn was born. Nora listened the way Nora listened to important things, which meant completely and without interruption and with her hands flat on the table and her green eyes steady on his face. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Do you have any guesses?" Finn looked at her. "About who he might be," he said. "Yes," said Nora. Finn thought about the question carefully. "The honest answer," he said slowly, "is that I have one guess. And the guess is so big that I cannot quite hold the whole shape of it yet." Nora nodded. "Then we should probably go and find out," she said. Finn was already standing. The mountain remembered them. There was no other word for the difference between the way the granite cliff face had looked on their first approach and the way it looked on their second. The first time they had been strangers to it, and the rock had been a sealed wall with a single hidden depression at chest height. The second time, as embers set them down on the same granite ledge in the cold pre-dawn light, the circular depression was already glowing softly amber gold against the dark stone, illuminated from within in the manner of a porch light left on for someone the household is expecting. The door opened before Finn had pressed the compass against it, the smooth rock dividing inward with the easy familiarity of a door responding to a knock from a friend rather than to the unlocking of a stranger's key. The passage beyond glowed warmly. The mountain was welcoming them home. They walked the long curving passage to the chamber of amber columns, and the mountain's geological heartbeat was stronger this time. The slow pulse beneath the floor warm and steady and unmistakably alive. In the chamber, the columns of light around the walls glowed warmer too, as if they had been holding their light back politely on the first visit and were now showing their full brightness. The presence at the center of the chamber, the mountain itself condensed into recognition, communicated a single wordless, complete thought as Finn entered. It was the thought of permission, of unlocking, of going further now, of you are ready. Finn placed his palm briefly against the polished stone floor in acknowledgement, and the floor pulsed back warmly against his hand. Then he stood and looked across the chamber to the far wall where, 3 days ago, there had been only smooth stone, and now there was a door. It was not large, not impressive, not adorned with the kind of dramatic detail that doors in stories about ancient mountains often have. It was modest and rounded at the top and made of a dark wood that should not have existed in a place where no tree had ever grown. A wood the warm, rich brown of old library shelves and well-loved kitchen tables. The kind of wood that has been touched by many hands over many years and has taken on the soft polish that hands leave behind. There was a simple iron latch. Above the latch, at exactly the height of Finn's eyes, a single word carved carefully into the wood in the same handwriting Finn now recognized better than his own. The handwriting that slanted urgently to the right, as if the letters themselves had places to be. The word was Finn. He stood looking at his own name on the wood of a door inside the heart of a living mountain for a long time. Nora stood beside him and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say to a moment like that. Ember waited at the entrance to the chamber, and watched them with both golden eyes wide. Finn felt his hand reach for the latch without consciously deciding to move it. The way his feet had walked him into the gray wood, and his hand had pressed into the depression on the cliff face, and every important movement of his life had been made not by him exactly, but through him, by the same quiet certainty that had been guiding everything from the night the sky cracked open over Stonehaven. He pressed down on the latch. The door swung inward without sound. The room beyond was small, a circle perhaps 6 meters across. Its curved walls glowed with the same compressed mineral light as the mountain's passages, but softer here, gentler, the warm muted gold of a room that has been quietly inhabited for a very long time. The air smelled of stone and something else underneath, paper, books. The particular smell of pages that have been turned by the same hands many times across many years until the paper itself takes on the warm, dry presence of long companionship. Around the walls of the circular room, shelves cut directly into the stone, and on the shelves, books. Hundreds of them. Some bound in leather. Some bound in fabric. Some loose-bound in heavy paper. Each one carefully placed. Each one clearly read. In the center of the room, a small simple table. 2 simple chairs. A bowl of something that looked like fruit but glowed faintly with the same warm light as the walls. A single candle in a brass holder, burning steadily even though there was no draft and no obvious source of flame. And in one of the chairs, sitting perfectly still, a boy. Finn stopped completely in the doorway. He had told Nora that morning that he had one guess about who might be in this room, and that the guess was so big he could not quite hold the whole shape of it. The shape settled into him now, complete and clear and impossible to look away from. The boy in the chair was exactly his age, exactly his height, the same messy brown hair, the same color, the same way of falling slightly across the forehead, the same green eyes, the same precise shade, the same particular shape at the outer corners, the same hands resting on the table, the same way of sitting, slightly forward, slightly attentive, slightly ready. He was wearing simple clothes that were not from any era Finn could place precisely, soft and gray and well-made. His skin was paler than Finn's, the pallor of someone who had genuinely never been touched by direct sunlight. His face when he looked up at Finn standing in the doorway showed not surprise, not confusion, not fear. He had been waiting for this exact moment for as long as he could remember, and what his face showed was the particular quality of recognition that arrives when something you have hoped for across an extraordinarily long time finally becomes real in front of you. "Hello," he said. His voice was the same as Finn's voice. "You came." Finn could not immediately speak. He took one step into the room, and then another, and then he sat down in the empty chair across the table from the boy, who was somehow simultaneously a stranger and the most familiar person he had ever encountered. Nora stood in the doorway with one hand pressed to her mouth and very wide eyes, and the particular silence of someone who is witnessing something they do not yet understand, but already knows is enormously important. Ember settled outside the chamber and watched without interfering, because some doorways are crossed by certain people only. The boy in the chair waited until Finn was settled. Then he said, very gently, "My name is also Finn. I know you do not know what that means yet. I will try to explain it carefully." He spoke calmly, in a voice that was the same as Finn's voice, but used in a way that was completely different, slower, more measured, the voice of someone who had spent his entire life thinking carefully about things and choosing his words. He told Finn the truth in the careful, unhurried way the room itself seemed to encourage. 11 years ago, before Finn was born, their grandfather had come to this mountain and learned something the mountain had been waiting for many centuries to share. There were certain people in the world whose particular quality of attention, the kind of seeing the mountain had recognized in Finn, was so rare and so important that the world itself, the ancient living parts of it, had been quietly developing a way to protect that quality, to give it the best possible chance of surviving in a world that increasingly did not value it. The way was this. When a child was born who carried that particular quality of attention, a second presence was held in trust by the mountain. A reflection, a sibling of attention, not a twin exactly, not a copy, a companion, someone who shared the deepest core of who that child was, the part that paid attention, and who could be drawn upon, when the time came, for the things that the child alone could not yet hold. The other Finn paused. He looked at his hands on the table. "I am not your reflection in the way a mirror gives a reflection," he said. I am separate. I have my own thoughts, my own preferences, my own dreams. I have read every book in this room, some of them many times. I have wondered every day for as long as I can remember what the wind felt like, what rain tasted like, what it was like to run, what it was like to have a sister. He looked at Nora standing in the doorway, and the smile that crossed his face was the same smile Finn smiled, used for the first time on someone who had been a stranger his entire life. I have known about you since I was small enough to barely understand what knowing meant, he said softly. You and Nora, the dragon, the grandfather we share. I have known about all of you. I have been waiting. Finn finally found his voice. Why, he asked. The other Finn considered the question carefully. He looked around the small warm room with its hundreds of books, and its quiet candle, and its impossibly steady glow. Because, he said, when the world needs a certain kind of person, sometimes one person is not enough. Sometimes the work is too heavy, or too long, or too much for one 10-year-old boy to carry. And so the world prepares two of him, not to do the same things, to do different things, so that between them the things that need to be carried can actually be carried. What things? Finn asked. The other Finn smiled the same smile again. That, he said, is the part one do not know yet. I only know that the time has come. The compass pointed at you. You came. And now the door is open. He looked at the open door behind Nora, the warm passage of the mountain glowing beyond it, and his eyes filled with something complicated. Not quite tears, not quite fear, the very particular emotion of a person who has prepared their whole life for a moment and is now finally inside it. I have never seen the sun, he said quietly. Finn looked at him for a long time. The wonder of meeting someone who was simultaneously not him and entirely him, who shared the deepest part of who he was while being fully a separate person, was so strange and so vast that he had to set it aside for a moment in order to think clearly about the more immediate thing. There was a boy in front of him, a boy who had never seen the sun, a boy who had been waiting his whole life inside a mountain for a door to open. The question of what to do was not a question. It was the simplest thing Finn had ever known. Come outside with me, he said. The other Finn looked up. His eyes were the same green as Finn's eyes, and they were filled now with something that Finn could only describe as careful hope, the hope of someone who has wanted something for a very long time and is afraid to want it too obviously even now that it is being offered. Are you sure? He asked. Finn looked at the books on the shelves and the warm walls and the steady candle and the bowl of glowing fruit and the small, careful room that had held a boy for 11 years, and he thought about his grandfather building this room, leaving the books, lighting the first candle, walking out the door knowing he would not be there when the other boy was finally invited to leave. And he thought about what the mountain had told him about attention, about truly seeing. I am sure, Finn said. I see you. And what I see is someone who has been waiting long enough. Come with me. Come and see what we look like in the light. The other Finn stood up. He stood up the way someone stands up who has been sitting for 11 years and is going to walk through a door he has only ever looked at and into a world he has only ever read about. Carefully, wonderingly, without hurry, he walked around the table and stood beside Finn, and they were exactly the same height to the millimeter, which Finn found extraordinary and a little funny in a way that helped break the enormousness of the moment into something they could both bear. Nora, the other Finn said quietly. Hi. Nora made a sound that was half laugh and half something much deeper, and she opened her arms, and the other Finn walked into them, and was held by his sister for the first time in his life, and Finn watched, and his eyes were wet, and he did not care. They walked out of the room together. The other Finn turned at the doorway and looked back at the small, warm space that had been his entire world. He did not say goodbye. The room would still be there, Finn understood. It would always still be there. Some places are not left behind. They simply become rooms you can return to whenever you need them. The chamber of amber columns greeted the other Finn with a slow, deep pulse of welcome from the floor that traveled up through the soles of his feet and made him laugh quietly. The same laugh Finn had laughed, used now for the first time on the texture of warm stone. Ember was waiting in the chamber, and when she saw the other Finn, she did the thing dragons do not normally do. She lowered her head and pressed her warm crimson nose gently against the boy's chest in greeting. He placed both his hands against her scales with the wonder of someone touching the first dragon they have ever met and the comfort of someone touching family. They walked back up through the mountain together, Finn and Nora and Ember and the boy who had never seen the sun, and at the smooth cliff faced the mountain breathed once, warm and welcoming, and the door opened into the cold pre-dawn highland air. The other Finn stopped at the threshold. The wind off the valley moved across his face for the very first time. The cold, the smell of pine and frost and distant smoke. The vast openness of the sky after 11 years of warm, enclosed stone. He closed his eyes for a long moment, and the expression that crossed his face was so simple and so complete that Finn understood, in that moment, more clearly than anything any adventure had taught him, that the most extraordinary thing in the universe is a person feeling something they have been waiting their whole life to feel. The other Finn opened his eyes. The first pale gold of dawn was just beginning to touch the eastern edge of the sky above the valley. He looked at it. He did not say anything. He simply looked at the sun beginning to rise for the first time in his 11 years of life. And his face that was Finn's face, held an expression that Finn knew he would carry with him for the rest of his own life. Pure, unguarded, complete wonder. The expression of meeting the world for the first time. That, the other Finn said finally, very quietly, is so much better than the books. And that is the lesson that lives at the heart of this adventure story for kids, explorers, and it is the most important lesson any of these stories has ever offered. Pay attention to the people the world places in your path, especially the ones who have been waiting for you longer than you knew, especially the ones whose lives have been quieter than yours, smaller than yours, less full of dramatic things than yours. The most precious gift you can give another person is not advice or help or even love in the abstract sense. It is the simple act of truly seeing them, of including them in your world, of saying with your presence and your patience and your full attention, I see you. You matter. Come outside with me into the light. The world is so much better than the books say it is. Let us experience it together. That is the kindest thing one person can do for another. And in a world where so much is loud and so many people feel unseen, that kindness is the rarest and most powerful magic there is. Hey explorers, if you walked all the way to the deepest room inside the living mountain with Finn today and met the boy who had been waiting his whole life, give this video the biggest thumbs up you have ever given anything and stay subscribed, because what is coming next is going to absolutely amaze you. Our comment question today is the most heartfelt one yet. If you could share one single moment from your own life with someone who had never experienced the world outside, what moment would you pick and why? Tell us below. Every single answer means something, and we read every single one. Subscribe to Whoosh Tales right now and ring that notification bell so you never miss a single adventure story for kids. Because next week the boy from the mountain steps fully into the sunlight for the very first time. And what happens in that moment? Something nobody, not the mountain, not old Thomas, not even their grandfather, could possibly have predicted, will change everything about who both of them are and what they are about to face together. We will see you next week, explorers. Hush. That evening, back at the cottage, the two Finns sat together on the rocky shore below the village watching the sun set over the Atlantic. The other Finn had a blanket around his shoulders because the highland evening air felt enormous to him in a way the first Finn could not entirely understand but could absolutely respect. Nora sat on a flat rock nearby with 2 mugs of tea, one for each of them, watching them both with the particular expression of someone watching something extraordinary settle into being ordinary. Ember dozed on the stones with one golden eye open. The sky over the water shifted slowly from gold to orange to deep pink to violet. The other Finn watched it without speaking for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet Finn almost missed it. There was a book in the room, the other Finn said, with a painting of a sunset on the cover. I looked at it every single day for 11 years. He paused. The painting was not wrong, exactly. He looked at the sky, but it was not this. It was not at all this. Finn put his hand on his brother's shoulder. No, he said quietly. It never is. The other Finn leaned slightly against him, and they watched the rest of the sunset together in silence. And somewhere deep inside the mountain behind them, the warm light of a small, empty round room continued to glow gently, the way certain places always glow once they have been homes, even after they have been left.